The international financial crisis of 2008, known as the Great Recession, was one of those "where were you when" moments. No matter who you are and where in the world you live, you remember exactly where you were in life and your own fears and trepidation when the overwhelming sense of doom in the global financial markets and economy was so pervasive. Who can forget the devastation that the world experienced when events triggered in part by corporate greed and malfeasance in financial capitals many of us knew little about, led to the first global recession since World War II. This was the most severe economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s, which that event in 2008 originated from the United States' housing market bubble and subprime mortgage crisis. It led to widespread unemployment, institutional failures, and global economic contraction. Nearly 2 decades later, our financial markets now run with integrity. Good evening and welcome to it, the G20 Focus. My name is Thulasizwe Simelane, and we are exactly 61 days away from the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg. And joining me this evening to discuss this important topic, part of the G20 agenda, in studio we have Christe-Anne Bersiks, the CEO of the South African Institute of Financial Markets. From Washington, we're joined by Raymond Baker, the president of advocacy group Global Financial Integrity, and in Berlin, we're joined by Paul Banoba, the Africa Regional Advisor, Transparency International. But as you can see in your screen there, we're also joined by the Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola. And the reason for that is that as the clock ticks towards the G20 Leaders Summit in November, the G20 Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting is expected to take place in New York this week. President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to address the meeting on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly debate. The big question is, will the United States participate at this meeting? For more, I'm joined virtually by Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola. Good evening, Minister, and thank you for your time. So what's on the agenda of this meeting of the G20 Ministers of Foreign Affairs that is to take place this week?
Yes, good evening to us and to all the viewers at home. Indeed, it's a meeting of the G20 Foreign Affairs Ministers meetings on the sideline of the UN General Assembly, which will also be, participants will include all other member states of the UN who may not be members of the G20. It's the second time a meeting of this nature is taking place on the sideline of the UN following the Brazilian one. In terms of the agenda, the key issues that we will want to drive in the meeting is to put forward the implementation of the Pact of the Future that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2024, to take forward the issues of the reform of the international financial architecture in the platform, and also the issues related to the critical mineral report that the UN took the decision on last year. So the meeting will be broadly encompassing on all those issues that need us to implement as resolutions or decisions of the UN, including the financing for development, the compromise or the Seville declaration.
So a big question then that naturally comes to the fore is that in earlier meetings that were taking place under the auspices of South Africa's presidency of the G20, we've not seen the next president of the G20 participating. What are your expectations in terms of the participation of the US Secretary of State at this particular meeting?
At this stage, the indications is that the US will participate. There is a confirmation, but it's not yet very clear as to at which level. But they will definitely participate because they have now decided to re-engage with the whole process of the G20, and they are participating in the various meetings of the G20 hosted by South Africa.
Sure, Minister, but there's certainly a sense of improved participation. But as you and I know, this is a meeting at the highest levels, at least in the foreign affairs space, and it happens with 61 days to go before the meeting of leaders, the Leaders Summit in November. Are you any clearer as to yes, U.S. participation, but will it be at Secretary of State level? Can you answer that question this evening?
Yeah. Yes, that is our expectation because we do have a confirmation of the U.S. Participation. So we expect that the participation will be at the level of the Secretary of State of the U.S. unless there will be any indication otherwise.
So talk to me about the importance of the work that you're doing happening alongside and on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly leaders debate. Does it talk to the interconnectedness of the agenda of the G20 and some of the goals and ambitions of the United Nations, some of the projects that it's been driving? Are you seeking to maximize on that interconnectedness?
Yes, indeed, Thulas. This is to reinforce the message that the UN is the prime multilateral platform of the world for all member states. As I've said, it was a meeting held by Brazil last year. It reinforces this year the message of the resolution on the Pact of the Future, the UN Financing for Development, Compromiso de Sevilla, and also the report on the critical minerals that was also adopted by the UN General Assembly. Indeed, we are reinforcing the work of the United Nations, and it is for that reason that this meeting has been brought on the margins of the UN General Assembly, which also give an opportunity to member states of the UN who are not necessarily member states of the G20.
So tell me, Minister, as we come to a close of our conversation, the work that you have done under the auspices of South Africa's presidency of the G20, how confident are you that you've laid the groundwork in the various meetings, especially the foreign affairs ministers' meetings, to ensure that this G20 bucks the trend of G20 summits ending without total and full agreement and consensus on the last resolutions, on the final resolutions?
Yes, it's the nature of any multilateral fora that negotiations on the text or declarations will go on until the last minute. This one of South Africa is no exception. We have been hard at work with all the meetings, working group meetings, the foreign ministers' meetings, the Sherpa track, and all the engagements have been pointing towards a discussion with regards to the declarations. There are still a lot of points that needs to be ironed out, but we remain confident that we can be able to master a declaration, and if not, we will obviously end up with a leader summary. But we are working very hard to achieve a declaration, and the negotiations will continue. This meeting will further enhance that work.
Lastly, Minister, let me squeeze in this one. On the current affairs front, today we saw countries such as the UK, Australia, and recognizing a state of Palestine given the developments happening in Gaza and Israel's role therein. Your reaction from Pretoria?
We welcome this development, and we see it as a major turning point to deal with the Israel impunity that is currently unfolding on the Gaza Strip, including the UN Human Rights Commission's report, which has provided with forensic detail the fact that what is currently unfolding in Palestine and the Gaza Strip is genocide. So we welcome this. It's a turning point. We call all members of the United States of the United Nations to follow suit and continue with the pressure to ensure that there is a cessation of fire. There is access to humanitarian aid in Gaza. There is also back to the negotiations for the two-state solution.
All right, let's leave it there. That's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola, joining me from New York ahead of the work that will be taking place in the coming week at the UN General Assembly. Stand by in the next few minutes, our discussion on the global financial system, its regulation and integrity. That and more still to come. This is G20 Focus. Welcome back. This is G20 Focus. So let's locate this conversation in context and perhaps give you an example that's relatable to many of us. The collapse of the community-founded VBS Mutual Bank has highlighted weaknesses in monitoring systems in the financial services sector that serve the interests of disadvantaged communities in South Africa. This is according to a University of Venda chartered accountant, Ndicheni Chitavane. The bank was declared insolvent in 2018 after over 2 billion rand was siphoned off between 2015 and 2018. Depositors who relied on the bank have now lost hope that promises to resuscitate it will ever materialize.
The Venda Building Society was established by various community structures in 1982. It was transformed into a mutual bank in 1992. The bank was used by individual depositors, stokvels and burial societies to save their funds. Between 2015 and 2017, several municipalities made illegal investments in the bank. By law, municipalities cannot invest in mutual banks. VBS Mutual Bank was declared insolvent in 2018, causing panic as depositors were unable to withdraw their funds. In 2019, the process to liquidate the bank ensued. The liquidation process has now seen some depositors recoup just over 25% of their funds. By March, over 600 million of the 2.3 billion rand looted had been recovered.
In the case of VBS, they will all have received 25.6% of what they invested from the first and second dividend payment. This percentage is determined by what the liquidator and his team have managed to claw back through the liquidation process. Of the 2.3 billion rand that was stolen from the bank, they have clawed back some 617 million rand.
Some depositors are disappointed that there seems to be no commitment to resuscitating the bank.
We are excited by what is happening in KwaZulu-Natal, in Itala. People are raising up, the government, the kingship and all that. They are protecting that institution, which is good. What about our province, Limpopo? They've got VBS to protect in the form of helping to resuscitate it. They are quiet. We are starting to lose confidence in what they promise and what they have said. But we are not giving up.
At least one accountant believes the collapse of the bank highlights the country's failure to support its financial institutions. The analyst believes earlier intervention by government could have kept the bank afloat.
In terms of what we can learn from the collapse of the VBS, I think it's more compliance in terms of the Reserve Bank. I think for me, they didn't do enough to monitor what was happening. I also blame the board of the VBS. I think they didn't do enough in terms of their fiduciary duties. Also the accountants, the auditors, those are the people that I think really didn't assist the community of Venda in terms of the collapse of the VBS. But I think it given us as a country an opportunity to learn from it, to ensure that we strengthen our governance in terms of all the banking licenses. It could be the normal banks, it could be the mutual bank.
Chipiwa Madozi, who was the chairperson of the bank at the time of its collapse, is currently serving a 15-year jail term after pleading guilty to 33 charges, including corruption, theft, fraud, and money laundering. The bank's chief financial officer, Philip Truter, also pleaded guilty and is serving a 10-year jail term. 12 other people, including the former provincial treasurer of the ANC in Limpopo, Denim Caesar, are being prosecuted on charges related to the collapse of VBS. The former Bavenda king, Tony Ramabulana, is currently challenging a Johannesburg High Court judgment for the recovery of more than 5 million rand. 2 years ago, the liquidator obtained an order to attach movable assets of former President Jacob Zuma after he fell behind on the repayments of his 7.8 million rand VBS loan. Biman Baloyi, SABC News, Polokwane.
So that's an example of the collapse of a financial institution occurring in 2018, some 10 years or so after the lessons were supposed to have been learned in the 2008 global financial crisis. Sure, the factors at play may have been different, but the underlying regulatory issues, some of them may not be so different. So why is it that a bank like VBS and Chase Bank in Kenya collapsed and the global economy wasn't shaken? That leads us nicely into our discussion tonight with my guests, Christe-Anne Bersiks, the CEO of the South African Institute of Financial Markets. From Washington, as I said, Raymond Baker, the president of advocacy group Global Financial Integrity. And in Berlin, I'm joined by Paul Banoba, the African Regional Advisor for Transparency International. So let me just get straight into it then. Ms. Bersiks, let me start with you, simply because you are closest to me in studio. Global financial regulation, integrity and stability. What are these concepts and why do they matter in the context of the G20?
Well, Thulasizwe, good evening and thank you for having us here tonight. When we look at what happened, first of all, with the 2008 meltdown, which I like to call it, the meltdown, because that's what it was.
That's what it was, yeah.
What was highlighted was a huge gap in regulatory oversight. And it has become crucial that our regulators are more involved, and our regulators have become more involved. So we've seen the introduction of the Twin Peaks regulatory model, where we have the Prudential Authority, who is run by the South African Reserve Bank. They look after the financial institutions, making sure that they do not fail. They are considered institutions of great importance that cannot fail, because that causes more collapse. And then we have, excuse me, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, who looks after the conduct of financial services providers and financial advisors, etc. And with regards to that regulation, so much has been put in place since then, and a lot to protect our institutions as well as the professionals involved in those institutions. The challenge is we can have regulation after regulation after regulation after regulation, but if the professionals and the players involved in the markets do not understand or adhere to and practice those codes and those regulations, we have a major problem, which is what we've seen with the VBS. And we tend to see figures, we talk about 2 billion rand. That kind of figure it's very difficult to conceptualize it. And we don't actually see the end result of the ultimate victim of these scandals, the people who've lost their pensions, etc. So, yes, we've come a long way with regulation, but there's so much more that needs to be done, not just for having that regulation in place, but for the acting on the regulation and making sure that those involved in the financial markets actually adhere to the regulations.
Let me bring in my other two guests, Mr. Baker and Mr. Banoba. Mr. Baker, let me start with you. At first glance, some of these issues that we're talking about, the regulation of financial markets, the banking sector, capital requirements and the likes, they appear to the untrained eye to be quintessentially domestic policy issues. What makes them globalized in the sense that we're talking about in the context of the G20?
Well, certainly the United States has a major impact on what goes on around the world. That U.S. financial policy, are you getting an echo?
I think we will work on just sorting that out. So let me pose that question to Mr. Banoba while we try and sort out the echo on your side, Mr. Baker. Mr. Banoba, what makes these issues of regulation of financial markets, banks and the likes to be, which I was saying, they appear to be quintessentially domestic issues, domestic policy issues in the individual countries. What makes them global?
Thank you so much, Russ. And it's a pleasure being with you on this program. In terms of the markets, these markets are very well connected, as we have seen in a number of examples. And from what we've just described, this really sad situation with the VBS Bank, some of the actors that, as law enforcement goes after them, will find them across borders, or if they don't find the actors across borders, if they can find them at all, a lot of the resources that we're looking for might have crossed borders. There is an obvious transnational element to the financial market because of its interconnectedness, and it's always a puzzle to law enforcement. So, and that's what makes it critical to have an international standards against which law enforcement will then try to apply any measures that they try to apply to this situation.
Yeah. Mr. Baker, your first thoughts on this topic. Talk to me about these issues of the integrity of financial markets, the regulation thereof, and the critical moment in the evolution of the G20. That was 2008.
I'll speak primarily to the United States. A lot of the regulations that have been put in place have been rolled back in recent months. And this is harmful to global efforts. Information on who owns companies has been rolled back. Shell companies are again able to operate in the United States. Our own financial intelligence unit, FinCEN, has been weakened. The anti-kleptocracy initiative in the Treasury Department has been shut down. Inspectors generals have been fired. The U.S. weakening of its transparency efforts is having a global impact because many countries feel that they have to operate with some degree of parallel to what's going on in the United States. In recent months, our transparency initiative has been set back.
All right, let me take a quick break. I'll come back because I want us to locate the discussion within the context of the evolution of the G20 that happened in 2008 from a regular meeting that involved in the main finance ministers and governors of central banks to one that is now seized with issues of global financial markets and their regulation, and even the elevation to the level of heads of state summit that has in its context the 2008 financial crisis. Quick break. This is G20 Focus. We'll continue with that discussion in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching G20 Focus. It's great to be with you this evening. Let me pick up the conversation with Mr. Banoba. Mr. Banoba, please locate for us the conversation we are having and the evolution of the G20 in the 2008 financial crisis. And I'd like us to go a bit deeper into it because in many ways, that is a key turning point for the G20, as I was saying earlier on, from a meeting that centered largely around finance ministers and central bank governors to one that, in a sense, at least from November 2008, was elevated even to the level of heads of state summit starting in Washington. Why was it a turning point?
Thank you so much. So from our side of the issue, in terms of what happened in 2008 and immediately post-2008, the crisis hit, it hit wide. It hit a number of economies, and the measures taken, the states had to come into place, bailouts at very high levels to stabilize and several jurisdictions. And that called for action that of a concerted nature. And some of that then spread into the conversations that who needs to take a role in shaping this market, who needs to take a role in ensuring good oversight, what kind of standards are needed, where do we draw leadership, and inevitably then entities like the G20 had to step up to take up some stronger measures with regard to global financial regulation.
Yeah. Ms. Bersiks, back to you in studio. Is a conversation we're having about what a word that I was hearing a lot back then when the crisis was playing out, contagion, that a systemic shock that happens in one financial market and the impact that it's likely to have in other markets given the interconnectedness. Was that the driving factor behind that evolution that we're talking about?
I believe so, yes, because, yes, there was such a ripple effect. It was throwing a giant stone into the water and the ripples reached everywhere, some not as extensively as the others. So, for example, South Africa, our financial institutions weren't as exposed as the US institutions. However, we suffered quite a lot in terms of manufacturing and export-driven industries because of the lack of demand due to the collapse of foreign demand for our exported goods and services. So it was a contagion, and it was very necessary for the global community to come together and collaborate and to find ways to solve the current issue as well as issues going forward so this doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Very crucial. Unfortunately, what's happened is as the years have gone by,
yes,
we are moving away from that collaborative effort, and it's far more politicized than I think anybody within the markets and industry would really like.
Yeah. All right, so you take us forward now to what we want to be talking about, what has since transpired, since that evolution we've been talking about. Take a look at this. We want to, as we take the conversation forward, show you what is known as the grey list. This is the Financial Action Task Force, listing of countries in terms of their ability to adhere to, proper principles around dealing with issues of terrorism financing, issues to do with illicit financial outflows and the like. So that's the picture that you are seeing in terms of the regions and the number of countries that are grey listed as of October 2024. And you can see that a significant number of those are in sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, if you are in South Africa, you'll know about us being on that grey list and the work that has gone towards ensuring that we exit that. But you also see countries in East Asia also there at about 8.5% of the countries on the grey list, the FATF grey list as of October 2024, Latin America and the Caribbean. But you do see the dominance of sub-Saharan Africa, and I think it's something that I'll want to put to Mr. Banoba in a moment. But let me take the conversation to you, Mr. Baker. Looking at that picture that we are showing on screen now about the prevalence that continues to be there, how effective would you say global financial markets and banking systems, how effective would you say it is, given the picture we just showed?
I think there's still a great deal of work to be done. I have long felt that the Financial Action Task Force should be elevated to a treaty organization so that there is some greater degree of strength in its compliance mechanisms. This may be far into the future, but at the present time, FATF only has the power of blacklisting or gray listing countries for inadequacies in their anti-money laundering and terrorist financing policies. I wish that could be elevated to a treaty level with more teeth in it than exist at the present time.
Yeah. So, Mr. Banoba, just your perspective from watching all of these developments from an African continental perspective on behalf of Transparency International. What does a picture like the one we just showed mean for those sub-Saharan African countries that so clearly dominate the percentage of countries on the FATF grey list, given the subject matter at hand, money laundering, terrorism financing, and in general, illicit financial outflows?
Thank you. So I think one observation we need to make is that being on that grey list indicates that the country that is listed is in conversation with FATF regarding addressing deficiencies. So the distinction between the grey list and blacklist. So the countries that we're seeing taking steps, some of them really seriously taking steps. The Republic of South Africa is one of those, to ensure that all these deficiencies are plugged. They are known, they are listed, and an action plan is drawn. So I think that is one distinction to make. But it is indeed concerning. When you look at Africa, if you look at this a little bit more detail, the big economics in the sub-region, if you like South Africa, in the case of Southern Africa, it's on this grey list. If you went to East Africa, Kenya is on this same grey list. You cross over to Central Africa, the biggest economy, DRC, is on the grey list. If you cross over to West Africa, same thing. Nigeria is on the grey list. And we've seen a very good assessment, including from the IMF, of the implications to those economies of being on the grey list, the economic implications, and the loss of confidence, investor confidence, market confidence, and everything that comes with that. So it is indeed a serious measure, but just to highlight that it means that the countries are taking steps, getting action plans, getting support to fix specific problems to regulating their markets.
So for completion of the point you are making then, Mr. Banoba, let me stick with you. It sounds as if you are juxtaposing against those countries that are not listed in this way on the grey list, in that perhaps the suggestion being we don't have a fuller picture of those countries. The countries we are seeing are the countries that are in the process and engaging with the Financial Action Task Force, whereas the fuller picture we may not see in those countries that are not in that process. Do I understand you correctly?
And that is indeed true. So we do not have, being on the grey list does not mean that that these countries are the only countries with these problems. It also does not mean that they are, that it's negative in the sense that deficiencies have been identified through a very thorough process, the mutual evaluation. And it also means that these countries are taking steps. It's also an opportunity for those countries to take those steps and using the latest up-to-date available tools at their disposal and at the disposal of their partners. So that indeed is at a level of transparency, knowing what is going on in these economies.
Ms. Bersiks, if I bring it back to you, what are the implications in financial markets, in the way that financial markets are regulated, of the scrutiny that comes with processes such as the FATF grey listing processes and processes to exit out of that?
Well, it absolutely amplifies the scrutiny. And when an investor is not confident in our operations on a level as simple, and I'm saying simple just for want of a better phrase, of grey listing issues, how can we trust then to receive more investment and help us in economic growth? The implications are far more wide-reaching than we actually think, as the man on the street, because when there's no confidence and not enough transparency in the markets, our markets fail. And that's absolutely what none of us want, specifically with industry. So we've got to make sure that our proverbial I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and make sure that we comply with the FATF requirements. And yes, we've done all that we can at the moment. We wait for the review, and whatever the outcome is, it doesn't end there. Because we've got the mutual evaluation coming up again very soon in the new year. So it's got to be an ongoing process. But one of the things that was highlighted as well was to be seen as an opportunity. I was at a conference recently, and one of the speakers actually said that it's was a good thing that we actually fell into this grey listing, because it highlighted the gaps and the issues and the regulatory issues that we face that we weren't as aware of as we should be.
Sure.
So
the challenge then becomes to get off the grey list and stay off the grey list.
And maintain the confidence in the market and the stability, and increase the transparency. But it's not easy to do. We've got a whole wide range of issues to comply with, and it's not just sitting with one body. It's not just sitting with the Financial Intelligence Centre or the SAB. There were instances where it actually went to the National Prosecutor, and there was issues from that section of our legislative framework that we needed compliance with. So it affects everything, and I always joke and say that if a tarantula sneezes in the Amazon, it affects the rand, but that is exactly what happens. So there are so many different variables to consider, and to get that balance right is tough, but we have to do it if we want to maintain our status as a respected economy, specifically within Africa and within the world, and continue going ahead and get that investment.
All right, let's pause it there for a moment. In the next few minutes, we'll focus on how these issues are playing themselves out in the banking sector, for example, here in South Africa, in the context of work that has been going on for decades now that involves countries that are part of the G20 and some of the systems they've set up for themselves for regulation of banking activities, such as the Basel processes that have been in place for a number of years. We take that conversation forward and also infuse the discussion about how the G20, in its current work that it's doing now, can drive that agenda for financial market stability and integrity, as well as regulation. That and more in a moment. Welcome back. This is G20 Focus. Let's focus now on one aspect of this topic of regulation and integrity of global financial markets. The banking sector under the spotlight in light of, in particular, events of 2008 in that financial crisis. Take a look at the work that has been done in South Africa, for example, around such processes as Know Your Customer, KYC, issues of what is known as FICA, financial intelligence, legislation in South Africa, and ensuring that you get as much detail about your client as possible, but also transactions that are suspicious, leading to fines being issued within the South African banking system. That's how the figures are looking between 2024 and 2025 in terms of the fines that were issued. The Bank of China, the Johannesburg branch, for example, being fined 30 million rand for non-compliance with some of those issues that I just mentioned. KYC, it varies in terms of which bank was fined for which, but in the main, they talk to those issues of KYC, Know Your Customer, Financial Intelligence Center Act compliance, as well as flagging suspicious transactions. That all talks to the integrity of at least the banking system. So in that regard, the G20 has been seized with that matter at least since 2008, but some would say even before that, the countries that now make up the G20 have been seized with these matters. Conversations such as the set of principles that are espoused in Basel, in the Basel processes, for example, go back as early as the 80s or thereabouts. Of course, there is the Financial Stability Board that was established by the G20, also weighing in into these conversations. Mr. Baker, let me pick up the conversation with you and ask you, specifically as far as the banking sector is concerned, what's your assessment of the work that started to gather momentum? It had been there before the group of 10 countries in the Basel processes, the IMF when they were advising the G7, but it seemed to intensify around 2008. Has that momentum of the regulation of banks and setting standards for when to flag transactions, for what kind of information you need to have about your customer and the likes, has that momentum been maintained since 2008?
I don't think so. there have been more banking scandals over the last quarter century, indeed over the last 20 years, than at any other time in history. There have been more banks that have been fined for weaknesses in their regulatory systems. Let me, again, talking about the United States, just give you one example. In the U.S., when a transaction comes through the door that looks like it might be suspicious, that is to say, a transfer or an effort to open a new account, and it looks suspicious, or a currency deposit that looks like it may be suspicious, U.S. banks are supposed to file a suspicious transaction report or a currency transaction report with the government. Now, you would think that this would be just an occasional requirement, a necessity to file such a report because the banks would be doing a pretty good job of their anti-money laundering efforts. That's not true. In the United States, the banking system on average files 80,000 such reports a day. 80,000 reports of suspicious transactions or currency transactions are filed. What this basically means is that the world's biggest financial system is wide open to illicit money coming in. You take the money and you file a report on what's going on. This has, again, I say, this has its spin-off effect around the world. Weakness in bank and anti-money laundering efforts in the United States influences other countries. I don't think we're doing nearly as good a job, whether in the U.S. or in most other countries, as we could in curtailing falsified transactions that go through the legitimate banking system.
That's a scary proposition, isn't it, Mr. Baker? If I ask you to just take that point to its completion, given the interconnectedness of the banking system, the international financial system, what you're flagging is a scary proposition.
Scary how? How do you mean the magnitude of...
Yes, the magnitude, yes, and the extent to which the regulatory systems that are supposed to be curtailing the kind of activity that you are describing don't seem to be effective.
They are not effective. Money laundering has been growing. The movement of illicit funds has been growing. Corruption has been growing around the world, despite significant efforts to curtail corruption. The cross-border flow of corrupt money may be at the highest levels now that it has ever been. There's so much more that could be done to require transparency, and perhaps we'll get into that in subsequent questions.
Yeah.
But our thinking is not there yet. Our thinking globally is we need to keep the world open to the free flow of money. Well, that means the free flow of illegitimate money as well. We're not cracking down on it nearly to the extent that we could and should.
All right, let's pause there for a moment. We'll come back in a moment and we'll focus. That was just the discussion on banking and banking as a segment of this discussion around international market stability as well as regulation. In the next few minutes, we focus on, the markets, the financial sector beyond just the banks. We'll show you the figures and then we'll get into the discussion of how the G20 can move the needle around the discussions around transparency, fairness of the markets and the likes. That and more coming up.
The odds were stacked, the equation already already written. So, we worked late. We showed up early. We turned X into opportunity and Y into why not. The formula for our success. Do the math. Celebrating 20 years of maths and science excellence. Because when you are deeply invested, out of the ordinary things happen. Investec, out of the ordinary.
Okay, I see you. Okay, let me see you, Cherry Hill. Yeah, now take it back. Let me see you rock off, shake off. Let me see you rock off. Let me see you kick right, now kick left, now step forward, now step back. Lucozade, bring the energy.
To best describe Morning Live, let me quote what one of our anchors said. We are the national mascots. We are a show that gets to go out to the community. I love the campaigns that we develop here. We have On the Road, where we are empowering young people in our schools through our sport. We then follow the sun, which is a massive idea. We get to swim with sharks.
So the agenda is planning to go all out by having more dominance on social media platforms and also inviting more guests. We'll deliver informative discussions so that our viewers can get information that they need.
We at On Point are all about the people and the choices they make, right? Economics. So it is how somebody makes an income and what they use it for. We're going to try to bring in the better minds, fresh perspectives, so you can make better decisions.
SA Today is a solid news-driven show that covers a range of stories, from local to international news. We keep it fresh, we keep it current, so viewers stay informed.
Full View is the primetime news, and it delves deep into critical issues, providing in-depth analysis. So this is the show that gives you a 360 view.
What makes the show stand out is, I'll start with the anchor. He's brilliant. He asks, he fires, he doesn't hold back.
What stands out about Late Edition is that we're the only show that wraps up the day for you, but also throws forward to the day ahead. Stuff that will be coming up on Morning Live would have started to talk about.
Welcome back. This is G20 Focus. We're focusing on international markets, their stability, integrity, as well as regulations. Let's focus on the issue of the financial markets. At the best of times, financial markets and the activity thereof will make some people significantly wealthy, will drive economic performance. But, left unchecked, and at the worst of times, it leads to situations where unbridled greed, wanton recklessness in trading can cause significant harm to economies of countries as well as contagion around the world. Take a look at this graphic. This shows you penalties that have been issued by South Africa's regulator of markets. That's the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. Between 2023 and 2024, licenses suspended, 1,061 of various financial services providers, withdrawn FSP licenses, 75, debarred individuals, 156. But I want you to focus on that figure right at the bottom, 100 million rand in penalties issued on persons, 44 persons, 100 million rand. That is quite significant. And Ms. Bersiks, this is something that you can talk to. Tell me what led us to this picture.
Disgrace. No, but I think, and the FSCA has actually recently published the figures for the year ended March 2025.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, or fortunately, if you'll indulge me a few minutes, the stats are significantly higher and the volumes are significantly higher. And it's almost a double-edged sword. Does this mean that the regulator is more effective in regulating entities and as well as unlicensed entities, or does it mean that there are just so many more bad actors within the market? The optimist in me likes to think that it is more effective regulation, and coming from a point of view where I personally know the people within the regulatory environment and the regulators and see firsthand the work and the investigations that they do, I am very pro what they are doing, considering specifically that they have quite a significant lack of resources.
Yeah.
But it is terrifying to see those volumes and those kind of enforcement actions. But on the other hand, do we want to see zero? Because then that means that those bad actors are actually, because there's always going to be malfeasance in the market.
Mr. Banoba, wrap it up for us nicely. What for you will represent a successful effort on the part of the G20 around these matters that we have discussed in terms of driving that agenda of international market stability and, fairness and transparency?
I think one of the growing trends that we want to see more of, to build upon Ms. Bersiks' point, is identifying the actors. And growing in a nice way is that we're having more beneficial ownership registers that allow the law enforcement within an authority to have adequate, accurate, up-to-date information on who the actors are, who actually are the beneficial owners of the companies, of the making these transactions, and that information, another part of it, being available across law enforcement agencies. Now, when we have a lot of that, and when coupled with the idea of automatic exchange across law enforcement institutions, then we have an increasingly strong tool to counter some of the malfeasance that we're seeing.
All right. I've got to thank all of you for joining me this evening. My guests joining me on G20 Focus. That's how we come to the end of this week's edition. Join us next week as we continue the build-up towards South Africa's hosting of the G20 Leaders Summit, a conclusion of the country's presidency of the G20. Cheers. Good night.